Good afternoon and welcome to the third concurrent session of the day, Intercultural Development at a Small Private Liberal Arts College. Our presenters today are Simon Lucas and Angela Mitchell, faculty members at Wilmington College. If you have any questions for the presenters during the session, please feel free to enter those into the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom room screen, and we will address them at the end of their presentation. On that note, I will hand it over to our presenters.
Okay, I think we're ready. I'm just going to introduce myself and then I'm going to turn it over to Simon to chat a little bit. My name is Angela Mitchell and I'm a professor at Wilmington College. I'm also an alum of Wilmington College. I'm in my 20th year of teaching.
Hi, everybody. My name is Simon Lucas. I'm an assistant professor of marketing at Wilmington College. I'm just like Angela. I'm also an alum of the college. So we have an interesting kind of background that we bring to the kind of research and the initiatives that we have at the college because we just have a lot more invested in it. So we'll go ahead and kind of get things rolling for you.
All right, so I'm going to start off and just talk a little bit about the college. The college is located in Wilmington, Ohio, so Southwest Ohio. We are pretty much located equidistant from Columbus, Cincinnati, and Dayton. So we have a unique location. It's fairly rural. The college has been around since 1870. It was founded by Quakers, and you'll see on the screen there our core values of the college. This really permeates everything that we do at the college. Just some visible signs of the Quaker values. We don't go by titles, so in the classroom, students call us Angela and Simon. Students have equal voice, so students serve on our faculty governance committees. We don't have assigned parking. We also don't vote on things. So we come to consensus most of the time on things. But you'll notice from our core values, we have three in particular I wanted to point out: diversity, peace and social justice, and respect for all persons. And this kind of leads us into the global focus that I'm going to talk about next. We really, so we really have a commitment to global competency and increasing the skills of our students to really be active and contributing members of our global society. And we see that in a lot of different ways. I'm not necessarily going to read all of these for you, but it's part of our mission and vision of the college. It is part of our core values, and it also is an integral part of our general education program as well. So we require the students to take some courses specifically focused on global competency. So we believe that we are saying the right things and we're doing the right things, we think, but we've never really measured it. So here's our current approach in terms of how we integrate global knowledge, global competency into our general education. And I'll just kind of preface all of this to say that we believe that this is not enough, and we think that there certainly should be more of a focus, and we'll get to that later in the presentation. But as part of our freshman first year experience class, it's a 1 credit hour class, and we much like a lot of schools our size, we try to do a lot in that one class. And that 1 credit hour class is required of all freshmen. It's not required of transfer students if they come to us with more than 30 credit hours. So it's really focused on things like study skills, making the transition from high school to college. And then we kind of briefly talk about the Quaker way and Wilmington College core values. So they get it as a freshman. And then during the course of their time at Wilmington, they have to take 2 courses that are designated global courses. And I gave just a couple of examples there: world history, world food, British literature. Those are just some of the examples. Most of the time, this is integrated into another course in Gen Ed. So for example, they have to take 2 courses in the humanities. So British literature and world history, if they chose both of those, they get the G's and the humanities credit at the same time. And then finally, we have what we really consider it to be kind of our capstone general education class. It can be taken during their junior or senior year. It's a writing intensive class, and it's either focused on a global theme, a topic, or it could be focused on a specific geographic location. So for example, we have had courses centered on the Olympics and how the Olympics has impacted countries throughout history. And then we've also had a course centered only on the Middle East, or the things that happened with Hiroshima. So it can be very topical, but it also can be geographical. A lot of times these classes are really centered on areas of research from our faculty. So it's not necessarily the topics aren't necessarily repeated, but they can be if the faculty member wants to teach it multiple semesters. And then finally, we do have these optional cultural immersive experiences, and I just listed a few there. The DC lobby trip, we take students out of our business area to the Native American reservation over the summer. We have mostly European short study abroad trips. Then we have research-oriented trips and service-oriented trips. And I will just say that those are probably our most deliberate efforts to build cultural competency. The problem with those optional experiences is it's really not available to all of our students, mostly because of financial means. So all of those classes, all of those trips, actually, not necessarily classes, but the trips, they can have a class component, but they cost money. And about, would you say, Simon, probably 90% of our students are receiving federal financial aid. We have a fairly high discount rate. It's about 47%. So again, we're not atypical in terms of small liberal arts colleges. And that funding piece of it really deters a lot of our students from being able to capture those immersive experiences. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Simon now, and he's going to talk a bit about our attempt to do this kind of pilot study and measure where we are with cultural competence.
So we talk a big game at Wilmington about bringing them in and having them have this global course and having them, do something at the beginning of, their experience with us, and then something again at the end. And while I appreciate our talk, we aren't doing a very good job of measuring if we're actually making a difference, right? So we're giving them these things, but are they actually popping out on the other side with their degree and some intercultural competence? Well, when I'm teaching, my students will tell you I start almost every lecture the same way. I start it with a long, boring definition. So I'm going to just give you the long, boring definition of intercultural competence, and then we just kind of work from there and we break things down. Okay, so intercultural competence is the ability to function effectively across cultures, to think and act appropriately, and to communicate and work with people from different cultural backgrounds at home or abroad. Big, long, boring definition, right? Well, it's a really, really important definition, and it's something that we are trying to figure out if we're really doing a good job of infusing this intercultural competence in our students. So why is it important? I just went through that whole long, boring definition. Well, let me tell you, intercultural competence is an extremely valuable asset because the work world that our students are popping out into after 4 years is a lot different. It's evolving every day. There's so much more diversity in our world than there was, 15, 20 years ago in the workforce. Our students have to understand how to interact with people that are different than themselves. The increasingly diverse world demands intercultural competence of all of our students. Because the world is more diverse, it's more likely that they're going to interact with people from different cultures now. We are a small rural area, and most of our students are coming from farms and, really, really small towns. We know that even though they are coming from those small towns, the opportunities and the chances to encounter people not like themselves are growing because the United States is changing. The actual, demographic of the United States is changing. So even though they're coming from these small towns, we want to make sure that we are helping them to interact with people that just maybe aren't exactly like the people they're used to encountering every single day. Intercultural competence is super important because we are shaped by different values, beliefs, and experiences. All of us, everyone on this call right now, we all are shaped by very different things. And if we don't have some kind of base level of intercultural competence, it can make it really hard for us to succeed out there. So what we wanted to do was figure out how we could assess the intercultural competence of our students on campus. So we're giving them these G classes. We're making sure they take some, cool stuff that has to do with other countries, but are we really, really doing a good job? So we wanted to find out how to assess that. Angela and I started using a tool called the IDI. It's the Intercultural Development Inventory. It is a very, very premier cross-cultural assessment of the competence of our students, and it's used by thousands of individuals, businesses, colleges, and universities to determine what the level of intercultural competence is within their organization. By determining what that level is, then we can decide if we're doing a good job or not, and we can make changes to programming based upon that. So we talk all the time about infusing our Quaker values into all of our courses. I'm a marketing professor. I still infuse Quaker values into my marketing courses. I'm not a Quaker, but I take the mission of the college very seriously. So we learn a lot about social justice and how it's used in advertising. An example would be, we know for a fact that big tobacco companies are targeting low-income Black communities with billboards that are pushing alcohol and cigarettes far more than they are using those to target other demographics. So that's just an example of ways that I infuse that kind of thing into my class. But then I start to wonder, am I actually getting anywhere? Well, by assessing their intercultural competence, we are kind of looking at ways to figure out if we're actually digging in there and getting into their heads a little. So a little bit about the IDI, just in brief. It is basically a 50-item questionnaire that the students take online. It's pretty quick and easy. It's not like anything long and drawn out, which you guys know our students wouldn't be able to probably focus for that long anyway. So it's a very quick and easy questionnaire that they take. After they take it, the IDI then generates kind of like a profile of their capability for shifting cultural perspective and adapting behavior toward people that are unlike themselves. So they take this test and they get this thing spit out that says, hey, here's where you fall as far as that goes. Here's what you do well. Here's what you maybe are struggling with. Here's what you think you're doing well, but you may not be. So the IDI is pretty straightforward. And what it does is when it spits out that result, it puts you someplace on this continuum. I use continuums all the time in class, and I'm sure some of you on here use continuums all the time in class. But here's our continuum. And we know that a word like denial down here, that's no good, okay? We could be in denial, polarization, minimization, acceptance, or adaptation. These are our cultural mindsets, the continuum of how well we can deal with people of other cultures, basically, okay? So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of where those things fall on that continuum. It's not that hard. It's not rocket science, but it's really important because as we start to identify where we fall on the continuum, we start to ask ourselves some pretty honest questions, okay? And that's what we're trying to get our students to do as well. So denial was that first part on the continuum. This is an orientation that recognizes really, really observable cultural differences, but probably isn't really paying much attention to anything else. You might notice that the African-American community eats different foods where you live than what you do, but you might not really be paying too much attention to their actual like Black experience out there, okay? What it's like to actually be Black. So it can be very surface level. A lot of times if we're working from an orientation of denial, we pretty much avoid or withdraw from maybe people that are just different than us. We just stay away from them, okay? So then the next one on that continuum is polarization. Now, this is a pretty judgmental orientation that views culture in terms of us and them. That happens a lot. Polarization is exactly what it says. It's us and them. It tends to have a very uncritical view toward your own culture and really overly critical toward the other culture. Okay, so that's polarization. So as we continue to move along that continuum, we get to minimization. And this is an orientation that is going to highlight cultural commonalities and universal values. It's going to seem kind of good, like you feel like you're doing good, but you're probably also masking some deeper recognition of those cultural differences. So if I'm thinking of an example of minimization, I tend to minimize sometimes. I will minimize and I'll say, no, I don't care what color your skin is. We're all the same and everything's fine and we're going to make it. Well, the fact of the matter is, that's great. It's lovely that I say that, but it's masking a deeper recognition of the true cultural differences that we have. So kind of right there in the middle is that minimization. Next, as we get toward our goal, or as we get toward being more culturally accepting, we get to acceptance. This is an orientation that's going to recognize and appreciate patterns of cultural difference and commonality in one's own and other cultures. This is pretty darn good. If you fall here on the continuum, you're doing pretty freaking good, just to be honest. You're recognizing commonalities, but you're also recognizing differences, and that can be really difficult for people to do. The last one on that continuum is adaptation. This is the goal, and it's really, really hard. I mean, hard. I consider myself to be woke. I consider myself to be a champion for diversity, and I definitely didn't fall under adaptation on that continuum. So adaptation is the orientation that can shift cultural perspective and change behavior in culturally appropriate and authentic ways, very authentic ways. That's harder to do than what you think, so that's kind of a brief overview of that continuum and what the IDI is looking at when we are surveying these students. We're seeing where they fall along these lines.
All right, so I'm going to move into a little bit of the data analysis and just some information on our methodology. The cost for the survey per student was $12, and we funded that through a grant, so that the grant by default kind of determined how many we were going to get. So our target was 200 students. We collected the data over 2 semesters, and it certainly was not a random sample. We really looked at this as a pilot study to get an initial read on, where are we with global and intercultural competency with our students. Even though it's part of our general education and we should be assessing it, we don't really assess it. Actually, we probably all have experiences with assessment and how we try to avoid assessment. So anyway, we just wanted to do this as a pilot study. We went through several rounds of trying to get the students to do it, and eventually we did get a fairly decent response. And then this semester also, we opened it up to some faculty and staff. We were a bit disappointed because we had a very low response rate from faculty and staff as well. And really, I think that would be a goal of ours to, it's not just the cultural competency of our students, it's our whole community. And, we really look at Wilmington College as a community. And again, part of our value system is everybody's on an equal playing field. And so, faculty, staff are just as important as creating the student experience as other students are in creating that experience. All right, so in our overall sample, we did get 158 respondents. So we went ahead and we had already paid for them. So we'll probably try to get to our 200 eventually. Trying to get ready for this presentation, we got 158, only 9 faculty and staff. Not too bad in terms of male female distribution. And I will point out that that male female designation is something that is I think a weakness in the IDI, that there aren't more gender categories on there. So this is certainly an artifact of the survey, and at the college we do track gender in a much more inclusive way, but from the survey those are the categories that we got. You'll notice too that it's very heavily junior senior. Again, it wasn't a random sample. We asked for faculty, you want to make it part of your class. We used our classes. And I'll just point out, if it's junior senior and we are hoping to increase their cultural competency, when we get to the data, hopefully the junior and senior scores are higher than the freshman and sophomore scores. But we'll look at that in just a minute. A couple of other things that we did not include, that could be something we could look at later. We didn't include major. We didn't include, we included their citizenship. So we really didn't delve into location. So as an example, we're in Southwestern Ohio, relatively conservative area. The majority of our students come from like a 6-county radius. So most of our students are in that area. As we develop this assessment, it would be interesting to look at whether they're from a more urban population versus, within our zip code. But that's just data that we didn't collect. And major certainly could impact that as well. We have a large number of ag majors. Usually ag and business are our 2 largest majors on campus. So again, that could be a factor in terms of demographic information that we could add. So just to provide a little bit of comparison to our overall population on campus, the gender breakdown was about the same, and we have a very low population of international students. We had a couple in the survey, and we're more equally distributed between the class ranks than what our survey is showing. One of the things, as I was putting together these slides, the data I forgot to gather was data on the diversity within our faculty and staff. I would say diversity within our faculty and staff from an ethnicity standpoint, it's virtually non-existent. We have very little diversity, but we do have more diversity, I would say, in terms of where they come from. So we have faculty and staff from lots of different areas across the United States. We have international faculty and staff. But in terms of ethnicity, we're fairly Caucasian, and we really don't have a lot of diversity across the board, across campus overall. So, that data, the faculty and staff data would have been interesting to see in terms of what our diversity looks like on campus. Okay, so here's the data. The data that we get a perceived, so that's where I would place myself. So as the individual is taking the assessment, there's questions that geared toward how they place themselves along that continuum. And then answers to other questions is really where they're at. That's where the IDI would place them along the continuum. And then the gap is the difference between the two. So you'll notice from the data that the majority are placing themselves in minimization. Everybody's the same, we're just a person, we're all going to get along kind of thing. And that's where most of our sample place themselves. But based on their answers to other questions, their real placement is in the denial polarization area. Which is certainly kind of surprising to us. I think that we expected the minimization. Just knowing the demographic of our students, we expected that they would probably be in that, I'm just looking at people as people. I look for things that are in common rather than trying to appreciate the differences and the value that those differences can bring to the table. But the denial and polarization where our students actually are was quite surprising, I think, to us. There's nearly, there's about a 34 point gap between our overestimation of where we place ourselves and where we really are. And that was common. This is the whole sample. So even though our sample with faculty was relatively small, we see that same trend that the faculty and staff are placing themselves in one category, and then actually they're in another category. Okay, so on the next slide, I'm just trying to break it down into some of our categories. I will preface all of this to say that even though we have some statistically significant results, because of the sample size, because of the lack of randomness, it's not really, we're not putting a lot of weight on it at this point, especially this one. So faculty and staff, we had 9 respondents and we had 149 from the student side. So even though there are some there are some differences that are statistically important, in general, it's probably inconclusive just because we had such a small sample. But it is interesting to see that the faculty and staff are in that, barely in, but they are in that next level on the continuum. They're in the acceptance level. So they kind of moved past the minimization, but again, still overestimating where they actually are. All right, next, just looking at some gender differences. And again, on this one, the kind of limitation of the survey is we were limited to female and male, but you can see statistically, even though differences are showing up, really there's no difference in males and females. And it was 55% male and 55% female and 45% male, which is pretty reflective of our campus overall. So yes, there was a little bit there. I will point out it shows that males overestimated to a higher level where they were than females according to this sample. But again, I think, you know, when we look at 117 to 115, probably not really difference, even though statistically the numbers show that there is. The next area, so the next area is really, this one was kind of tricky for us and we weren't really sure how to deal with it because our diversity is so limited on campus. So many of the categories, as you can see, we only had 1 respondent. Some of the categories, we had a few more than 1. So we did regroup the categories just to see if anything was happening into white, non-white, and prefer not to respond. Now, that may not be the best way to do it. We were just trying to see if we could see if anything was happening that seemed to be important. And I do think that probably something is there, but it's really hard with these small sample sizes to discern what's going on. So most of the numbers, again, are about the same. It's probably not an ideal way to look at the data, but then again, on the next slide, we did group them in white and non-white and then prefer not to respond. And there were absolutely no differences. And actually these p-values are quite high. So I'm fairly confident that at least with our students that we have, I don't know that ethnicity is going to be a big factor. I would be really interested, and I don't know how, with the IDI, we do have some ability to ask us specific questions. So it would be interesting to see what their parents' political affiliation is. There's something else happening there, but I don't know that ethnicity is something that is going to tell us a whole lot. And maybe gender I don't know, maybe dividing those categories a little bit better might help with gender. But in terms of our sample here, no statistical differences at all. And that's not to say that the differences don't exist. It's just that with our students, even if our students are coming to us with a different ethnicity than being Caucasian, they still often come from a very rural, small town environment. So there's other demographic factors that are at play there as opposed to just ethnicity. Okay, so here's really the heart of where we wanted to be. We wanted freshmen to be at, it sounds terrible, but we kind of wanted freshmen to be at the lower level, and we wanted to see this vast difference between our freshman and senior. But as you can see, again, we didn't move the needle, and that's our goal. We're hoping that as freshmen, they're at this point, and we've at least moved them a little bit along the continuum by the time they get to the junior, senior level. So here the data, again, no statistical significance at all. We are not, and again, I'm fairly confident with p-values at that level that we are not moving the needle like we think we are. So we're talking a big talk and we're saying all the right things, but we're not making it happen. And one of the things I think that might be going on is we are requiring all classroom experiences to try to move this needle. And there's just nothing that you can replicate in the classroom that will take the place of an immersive cultural experience. So remember back on those first slides where we talked about these optional trips that they can take. They can go to DC and they can lobby. They can go to Native American reservation. They can travel to Europe, they can travel to Costa Rica. There's all of these opportunities. And I would say in general, probably fewer than 100 students, and this is pre-COVID, fewer than 100 students, probably more like the 50 to 70 range, take advantage of those. We're a campus of about 1,100 students, 1,200 students. So a very, very small percentage of our students get those truly immersive cultural experiences. And that's where I think we're going to move the needle. I don't think that we're going to do it just do this research paper in class, or we're going to talk about this cultural issue or this global issue that's happening. So, I don't know. I don't know. And I think what we're seeing here is we're doing our best, but in the classroom, it's just hard to replicate. I've traveled with students for 15 years, taking them to Europe every spring break. And you just cannot imagine the number of students from small rural Ohio that have never been on a plane before and watching their faces when they're on a 6-hour plane ride, or they're trying to navigate an airport, or they're trying to order food in Paris. I mean, there's all these things that, yes, we can talk about it in the classroom, but until you actually experience it, that's where the differences are actually happening. Okay, so I think that's my last slide for this. Oh, no, one more slide. Okay, so limitations, I kind of talked about those as we've gone along. Sample size for sure, we could do better with that. It would be interesting to do a freshman assessment and then do a senior assessment and do a paired test. But for this pilot study, we were just kind of trying to get a read from where we were. Ethnic diversity, again, that was an issue. Small number of faculty and staff. It's hard for us to market and boast. We enhance your cultural competency, and we talk about diversity when we don't really live that on campus with the lack of diversity that we have in our faculty and staff on campus. And then the timing of the research, I don't know what is the best time, but we tried to do an academic year's worth of data. We tried to, okay, you have a week and a half to finish this, you have 2 weeks, so there's probably a better way to actually do the research. And again, maybe we capture them during freshman orientation, and then we try to capture them during a senior activity or something like that. So we probably could do better with the timing of the research. And then again, some more demographic information probably would be helpful. Asking even their zip code. I think if we asked their zip code, that would tell us a lot about the politics and just the lifestyle and what they are likely to be exposed to if they grew up in, an urban zip code versus our rural zip code. Okay, now I think it's Simon's turn.
All right. Well, Angela, I was just thinking, you were talking about like the experiences abroad for your students and stuff. I took my students on a field trip to Procter & Gamble, which is just in downtown Cincinnati, and their minds were blown. They had never been in the city. I mean, it was really shocking to them to even have that cultural experience, to see Black people walking around, to see, it was really something for them. So, our key takeaways, we have a lot of work to do, and we knew we had a lot of work to do. That's why we did this survey. The average perceived level is minimization, but actually they're in denial and polarization. So if we're offering these optional experiences, well, if they're in denial and polarization, they don't want these experiences anyway. Right? So we've got to figure some things out, right? We've got to figure out how to move the needle with them. Again, we had some differences noted between faculty, staff, and students. One of our key takeaways that males have a wider gap between perceived, what they think of themselves and what their actual score was. Ethnicity was not a factor, and class rank wasn't a factor. Our core values say that we are developing cultural awareness in our students, but this data shows that there is, no marked difference between freshmen and seniors. So we're not developing them. And we kind of had a hunch about that, right? Like, that's why we did this. So, you do a survey like this so that you can take it to somebody and they're going to go, oh my gosh, we're not actually doing what we say that we're doing. So, those are some of the key takeaways. For us, we want to incorporate these things into general education. We want, the ultimate goal is to increase diversity of all kinds on campus, increase cultural competency in our students and our faculty and staff. And I think long range, our goal is to provide some sort of immersive intercultural experience for all students during their time with us. We believe it could be an area of distinction for the college. It should be. It's something that we tout. We're a Quaker school. We should be absolutely building that competency for our students. It's going to take a good, a good bit of funding, just like, about every other thing on earth. But, we really feel like we have the resources, available, and we just want to start moving the needle. And we felt that this survey was a great start to do so. So I'm going to leave it here. If there are questions, I know the moderator is going to step in. There's our contact information. If anybody wants to talk to us further after this, we'd love it, because it's not like our students want to talk to us. So we'll welcome any conversation that anybody'd like to have further.
Thank you, Simon and Angela. We do have a question. Could students do the inventory in an FYE course for a larger sample size?
So yeah, I think that was one of the hopes moving forward, is that it would be part of FYE. We just have to convince somebody in administration to pay for it, because we had the grant and we get about 300-ish, 325 students every year. So we need to be able to fund that in some way. So I think, that's the biggest hurdle for us. I think we could certainly incorporate it. And I think faculty teaching the FYE would be on board with that. It's just getting the funding.
Thank you, Angela. The floor is open for any other questions. If you have questions, please enter them down in the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom room.
It's really just like being in class, Get to the end of class, I'm like, does anyone have any questions? They're like packing their stuff up and running.
Waiting for somebody to join you in your office for office hours.
Right.
So it looks like we don't have any further questions. Thank you, Angela and Simon, for sharing this valuable information with us all. Thank you all for joining us today for the last session in room 3. The next concurrent session will begin at 3 p.m. Eastern. You can view the chat session at the bottom of the screen for the links to access the conference website for a complete list of concurrent sessions and their descriptions. While accessing the conference website, don't forget to swing by the virtual exhibit hall to say hello to the Hawks team. While there, you can view a quick 5-minute demonstration, request your t-shirt, and be entered to win a $50 hourly giveaway. Also, in the spirit of St. Patrick's Day, you'll find a few golden coins hidden throughout the conference website. Click on the coins to be entered in to win an additional raffle. We will see you at the next session. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Simon.